Welcome back, everybody. It's my great pleasure right now to introduce Dr. Brian Anderson, who's the Chief Executive Officer for the Coalition for Health AI, further down the table, and Jorge Calzada, the Platforms Division Director for CDC. And they are both here to discuss some issues at the forefront of the future of AI in the health sciences realm, particularly in the public health, population health domain. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to them and to Dr. Shah, who will be moderating the conversation after they've made their remarks. So thank you very much for coming all this way to this summit.
All right. Can you guys hear me all right? No microphone feedback? So I guess I wanted to start off sharing a little bit about what CHAI is about and how it's relevant to you all here in the room here. 3 years ago, we were in the middle of the pandemic. This was certainly one of the epicenters here in Washington. And in that pandemic, we were all, many in the private sector, working together in what I would call non-traditional partnerships. You had inherently competitive groups like Google and Microsoft and Amazon and pharmaceutical companies like Moderna and others, and Lilly or Pfizer working together, focused on the pandemic. And we were doing a lot of great things. During that time, as we were appreciating that, we asked, is there something in the space of AI where we can bring together these inherently competitive organizations, identify a pre-competitive space to make some progress on in AI? And the question we asked was, do we have consensus at a technical level about what good, responsible AI in health looks like? The answer, of course, we found was no, we don't. We have a lot of really good work happening in places like Microsoft and Google and other health systems and big companies and small companies, but we don't have, as an example, agreement at a technically explicit level about what a model's life cycle from its development to its deployment to its maintenance and monitoring and governance, what the technical definitions of good, responsible AI look like. And we believe, as I think you probably do, that is a problem, particularly in a consequential space like health. I think we've had other speakers here, share their thoughts. Some of whom said, we're not ready for Gen AI in health because we don't have these best practice frameworks, because we don't have these standards in a space that is so personal and of high consequences health. We need that. And so that's been the mission of CHAI, bringing together the private sector, multi-stakeholder groups from health systems to big tech and small tech to payers and medical device manufacturers and patient community advocates and the public sector to come together to help define what those best practices are. How do we measure bias in generative AI? If any AI developer were to tell you that we know how to do that and we have a consensus definition on how to measure performance or bias, they'd be lying to you. We don't. So how do we do that? These are urgent and important questions. That's what we've been focused on. The other big thing that we focus on in CHAI is this concept of assurance or alignment. This was something we talked about in our policy working group I brought up earlier. But in every other sector of consequence in the US economy or the world economy for that matter, we have independent entities that will evaluate and validate the claims or the safety of that device. Think of automotive industry or the aerospace industry or consumer electrical devices where I put, lamps in my son's bedroom and I know or I hope that they don't short out because they've been tested and evaluated. We don't have that in health AI or AI writ large. That is a huge problem when, as a provider, I have a tool in front of me that I could potentially use on a patient in front of me. And I don't know the performance metrics for that specific model on patients like that one in front of me from an independent, unbiased, conflict of interest-free entity. So one of the major focuses in CHAI is how do we create a network of independent, trustworthy quality assurance labs that can actually do that work, that have access to testing data, that can partner with a customer of AI and a developer of AI and say, here's an independent evaluation of that model's claims. Here's where its limitations should be noted, and here's where it performs really well, and here's where it doesn't perform really well. So AI assurance is the other big thing. The third area of focus is around education or upskilling. AI is moving a mile a minute. I'm throwing at you concepts like responsible AI. Many physicians at the front line don't have much of a detailed understanding about what responsible AI means. If I were to ask a provider to think critically and ask and come up with an answer to the question, is this AI tool appropriate for the patient I have in front of them, they wouldn't have much information or data to make a determination on. And part of the challenge is we don't have transparency informing those providers or public health officials on how these tools actually either conform or don't conform to those responsible AI best practices that I'd mentioned. And so part of what we're urgently focusing on is how do we upskill, train nurses, clinicians, public health officials around how to think critically about AI in health from a responsible AI principles-based method as well as more detailed technical approaches. So those are the areas of focus within CHAI today. Happy to dive into it later.
Thank you. A big part of my job is to help the agencies, help CDC become AI ready. And so the focus of that really is in like 3 big work streams. So number 1 is about data quality. So I think Sachin asked the question about if you could raise your hand if you think AI is going to impact your organization. And I think everybody raised their hand, right? Keep your hand raised, or raise your hand, if you trust your data. Raise your hand if you're actively measuring the quality of your data along multiple attributes, such as accuracy, timeliness, consistency. Awesome. That's more hands than I was expecting. So that's a big point of emphasis for the work that I'm doing at CDC, coming up with a common framework for measuring data quality, getting that buy-in from all the different centers within CDC, and then implementing that framework inside of the platforms that we use at CDC to measure data quality automatically, publish that result. I'm a huge fan of the saying that sunshine is the best disinfectant. So making sure that we're transparent about the quality of our data. And that's the first thing. And if that's the only thing that I do at CDC, my time will be incredibly well spent. The second point of emphasis, or the second work stream, is about building a modern data platform inside of CDC. So CDC is a collection of different centers, about 26 of them. We have 26 different data lakes inside of CDC. We need to modernize our platforms, make them cloud-based, following best practices such as ingestion, storage, compute, visualization, servicing, orchestration, schema management, all at different layers so that we have that modularity in place. One of the things I'm trying to do is try to bust through all the data silos that exist inside of CDC, and I imagine they exist at the local level as well because we perpetuate those silos by the way we fund. Congress does it to us, funding us by disease, and I think we in turn, CDC, perpetuate that in public health. So there's a couple of different ways to cut across those data silos. You can move everything into one common data platform, which is a fantastic approach. Another approach that I'm piloting is this idea of a virtual knowledge graph. Can you do a virtual integration of your data? Raise your hand if you've heard of the term ontology. Awesome, I'm in the right setting. So an ontology describes relationships between different things, right? It's nodes and edges. You could use an ontology and represent that ontology to represent your data. So rather than physically moving your data to one common platform, you just describe your data through this ontology. That ontology can be stored centrally as a graph structure in a graph database. And now you can query that graph through a query language called Sparkle, and then it'll search across the graph. And if it finds something interesting, it'll go back to the original data sources and bring back that information. So you can have the benefits of centralization without physically moving your data, which is really helpful if your data is sitting in Azure, in Google Cloud, and in AWS. So that's one of the things that we're doing. And then lastly, the big point of emphasis around machine learning operations, building an MLOps platform. One of the things that I noticed when I got to CDC is that, by and large, we had a very sophisticated workforce. I think we're second to NASA in terms of PhDs, with a tremendous amount of statistical literacy at the agency. So, not surprisingly, we're pretty good at building models. But where we fall short as an agency is deploying those models and doing so at scale. And I think that's really where they're going to have the most benefit to public health, is making them available at scale. So we have one model that I love to point out called Tower Scout. What it does is during a Legionella outbreak, cooling towers are usually a prime suspect for the source of infection or the source of the outbreak. So what Tower Scout does is it looks through satellite images and spots all the cooling towers and says, here's a really good place to look. Now, I would argue that Tower Scout is much more powerful if it could be accessed through an API as part of your standard workflow, as opposed to having to call CDC and say, hey, can you spin up this instance of AWS and run this for me? So that's a lot of what we're trying to do, is build those best practices around responsible AI, making sure that we're developing model cards, making sure that we're measuring drift in our models. All models need to be managed in the wild. You train them on the world as it existed up to today, and guess what? Releasing them has an effect, and surely enough, data starts to drift, and so does the performance of your model. So you're constantly having to monitor that drift, and if it drifts too far, you may have to retrain your model. So those are the types of best practices and tools and processes that we're building at CDC.
Okay, we're going to have Dr. Shah join Jorge and Brian up on stage. Yeah, it's okay.
Okay, we had a little bit of an echo, so I'm going to sit somewhere next to the two of you. I didn't want to stand at the podium. It is an honor and a pleasure to join both of you. Jorge, thank you. Brian, thank you. Can we, first of all, a round of applause for... These are two experts in the room, and I have to, first of all, riff a little bit off of what Jorge just said about models being trained in the wild. I was not sure if we were really talking about AI, LLM, or if we were talking about truly something else being trained in the wild. So I just wanted to make sure we could get that off the table here. That was a joke, by the way. Didn't quite come off as one, but I just wanted to...
Trained in the lab, but released into the wild.
There you go. I love it. Well, thank you both. I do think there are a lot of things that both of you have brought up to the perspectives, and I have some questions, and I am going to make sure I follow time. I know we've got some great audience members who want to ask some questions as well. Thank you both, first of all, for coming to the state of Washington. We really appreciate that. We made sure that it was raining over the weekend and that by the time you both arrived, that it was dry and fantastically beautiful in a beautiful setting. So you can go back and tell all your colleagues this is the best place in the world, and it is in the world. By the way, put that in your new responsible AI type of sort of whatever the parameters you want to put in. Does that work, Brian? Perfect. Okay. So let's talk about trust. And we've got so many different audience members here from different perspectives, but I do think that trust is. It came up this morning. It came up when Jonathan was having his giving his talk. It came up in each of the sessions. Each of the three breakouts, as I walked in, we're talking about transparency, communication, building trust. How do we build trust in systems when inherently right now there is a lot of misunderstanding about what these systems are, these tools are, and how they can be applied for the promise of the future? So Brian, first you, and then Jorge.
I
think that's the most important existential question in this space. If you ask me, how do we build trust in these tools? It absolutely starts with what Jorge said around transparency and sunlight. So in Chai, we have a number of approaches on how to build trust. The first is coming up with a common objective as we can make it, definition of what good is, right? What does good, responsible AI look like? How do we get health systems, technology vendors, patient community advocates, and the public sector to agree, like, this is our definition of what responsible AI looks like for an ML ops manager at the development phase, for an implementer at the health system or payer or public health phase, for an AI governance committee. Because once you have that common definition that's explicitly defined, that's consensus-driven, that unlocks a number of other things. The second big thing that we're focused on as it relates to this around transparency is something Jorge had mentioned, is these model cards. So we have an effort underway in Chai to take the HTI-1 rule that ASTP, Tricia, where are you, ONC came out with last year, which was fantastic, an extensible effort that didn't stifle innovation. One of the, I think the novel things they did is, like they said, I think it's 31, Tricia, you can correct me if I'm wrong, 31 categories that we want to support model vendors and customers of those vendors to have an idea, like a nutrition label of what goes into that model. What they didn't do is define the technical specifics around that. They said, we want industry to do that. And so what we're doing is we're bringing together the industry members, and it's a challenge because you have technology vendors and health systems, each want transparency for different reasons. Health systems want to have, detailed information around how is that model trained, where are the data sets. Technology vendors, sensitive about revealing IP, how do I get to a level of transparency while maintaining my IP? But can they come together, define what those technical specifics are that go into a model card, and then use that as a way of building trust for provider organizations? As I'd mentioned in my opening set, one of the more important questions that a provider needs to be able to answer for any tool they have, be it a stethoscope, an ophthalmoscope, or an AI tool, is this tool appropriate for the patient I have in front of me? Right? As a clinician, I use a different ophthalmoscope or a different stethoscope if it's a pediatric neonate versus if it's an elderly person. We need to be able to have the information, ideally through these kinds of nutrition labels, model cards, to be able to answer that same kind of question with AI tools. We don't have that yet. And so that's candidly why I think it's appropriate that you have providers, survey after survey, aligning with the broader population, do not trust AI, because we can't understand basic things like what went into training it. We have technology companies, no offense to any technology company in the room, saying, it was trained on the internet. That should be deeply unsettling in terms of when we think about the systemic biases that are in these models. To just reinforce that through the use of these tools is something that we need to have a very kind of sober conversation about. So I think transparency, bringing together common definitions for what good looks like, and then therefore what bad looks like, and then being able to independently evaluate the claims that these models are making so that you're enabling providers and patients to be able to say, this model is good for me to use, that model is not so good, this model I need to be very careful about.
Nicely said. Jorge?
I mean, it's incredibly well covered by Brian. I would just say, just to echo what you said about transparency, it starts with the data that's being used to train these. Is this data representative of our populations? Is there a systemic bias? In our workshop, in our breakout room, Abigail reminded us about some of the structural issues that come up in measuring, in having a representative data set. So let's be transparent about that. I know I come from industry where we did a lot of vocal recognition. Well, the early data sets were all male voices. So those initial models had a hard time picking up on higher frequency voices, children and women, completely underperformed. So how do we be transparent about the data that was used to train these models? And as Brian said, the model cards are incredibly important to be transparent about what data was used, what algorithm was used, what versioning you had, and what is fit for purpose for this model.
Can I add one other thing?
Yeah, please.
So when you define what's fit for purpose, you define also what's out of purpose. What are the limitations of these models? And I think that's one of the things that we need to be much more rigorous about in terms of, what are the indications, what does it fit for purpose, but also what shouldn't it be used on?
Yeah, it's interesting you both brought this up and used the C word that none of us like, but we all know is important, which is consensus. Building consensus, gaining consensus, attaining consensus is incredibly difficult. So a follow-up question to both of you is, how do we incentivize responsible AI? How do we incentivize it? What can we do? And, Jorge, you're coming from, that federal perspective, regulatory or what have you, setting guidelines and all sorts of things, that we all look at as saying, okay, here's where we are. And Brian, you're coming at it from, obviously getting all these folks in the room, diverse interests, private sector, public sector, academic, just everybody coming. How do we incentivize the right thing and not the wrong thing when there are potential economic impact and interests that are significant in this realm? So Jorge first, and then Brian.
Yeah, so at CDC, it's a pretty unique perspective, right? We don't have sticks, we don't have authority. Like CMS, my colleagues at CMS, Medicare, Medicaid have authority to compel jurisdictions to share their data, to compare hospitals to share data. CDC does not have any of that. So all we have are carrots. Right, we have money, we have resources that we make available to partner with local jurisdictions, to partner with industry. I'm okay with that. I think I come from industry. I can't force my customers to buy my product. I have to build a very compelling, useful product that they want to buy, that they want to consume. And so that's really the mindset that my office is bringing to this. Like, how do we build great products?
Value add.
Exactly.
Value add. Brian.
So part of the magic in Chai is we have, the developers and sellers of AI models, tech companies, and you have, what I'll call, the customers of AI models. Traditionally, you might, two broad categories where you have health systems and hospitals and payers and life science companies. Now, there's obviously gray area in that. Those groups are sometimes making their own models, but, when you bring together those two entities in the private sector and you begin hearing what the customers want, right? The customers want this transparency. The customers want their customers, patients, to have a good outcome. And that is oftentimes relying, in the case of AI, on high quality tools. And so one of the things that we're doing to incentivize this kind of consensus, building consensus, is partnering very tightly with the customers of models, because many efforts that I've done over the years, it has always been successful when you partner with the patients and with the customers of the tech. It rarely is successful when you partner with the tech vendor. Again, no offense to tech vendors, I love you, but in a sort of not wanting the tail to wag the dog, you want to go to what the demand is. And so what we're working with with health systems and payers and patient community advocates is saying, okay, what do you need in the private sector to make a procurement decision on an AI tool, right? If you're in a health system out there, you're probably being inundated with tech vendors saying, they're going to sell you some AI tool that's going to solve all your problems or, particular problems. So what these customers of AI tools are saying is, we want model cards. We want transparency around what it is they're trying to sell us. We want independent evaluations done by a conflict of interest-free, capable, trusted partner. And if you give us that, tech vendor, we'll be more likely to buy what you sell us, right? Because you'll have given us additional data. You'll have kind of gone through the rigor of, having to be evaluated, and that may put you in a favorable position in the procurement process. The tech vendors get very excited about that. They want to obviously sell into these markets. They want to have a more streamlined process to be able to do that. So they get on board with the model cards. And so it's through that weird kind of Machiavellian process of bringing together the free market customer and seller of a commodity, in this case AI tool, that we're building consensus around what good looks like, because the customers are saying, in this case, we want transparency, we want to know that our patients are safe. You want to sell into us, so give us this information. They're willing to do that up to a point, right? It's not all rainbow and unicorns. There are real challenges in that space, but that's how we're incentivizing it.
That's great. Maybe a follow-up to that, or building on that, is when we have policies and guardrails, obviously important, there is the concern that it limits innovation, exploration, and the ability to create. So how do you balance the two, right? We don't want to be so, regulatory and with so many policies that are restrictive that we can't do what AI has the promise to do, and yet we also want to balance and make sure that we are protecting and doing all those things. So either Brian first and Jorge.
This is a tough question. There's no obvious easy answer to how you balance innovation. I can come up with several examples about how we're trying to do it at Schott. So I'd mentioned these assurance labs. It's great because these assurance labs are creating testing data and data that's de-identified, that's able to be used to validate a model, multimodal data, imaging, waveform, audio, clinical data, genomic data, et cetera. And that's great for validation. That's great for potentially a regulator to use. What people forget is these kinds of assurance labs can also support innovation, because that same kind of data, not the exact testing data, but different kinds of data can be used to accelerate the innovation. One of our earlier panelists had shared, one of the biggest challenges for tech companies is access to high quality data. These labs are going to enable that kind of data. So what we're trying to do is to create a framework and policy in place that both allows a regulatory framework to emerge that is trustworthy, that evaluates models for safety and efficacy with deep scientific expertise, while also supporting the startup tech company that can't afford to, give over $50 million for some data set, but that they do want to work with high quality data, and so here's an assurance lab to be able to do that. I think the other thing that I use and I reflect on, I come back to HTI-1 and the novelty and the extensibility around how the model card rule was put together, right? It didn't explicitly define everything, because this is a space where we do not yet have standards or best practices. Why would we want regulatory frameworks that are so technically explicit as if to describe a set standard? We don't have that yet. And so creating the regulatory frameworks that allow industry to partner with the public sector to create that level of technical specificity where you can actually measure things and see if they're good or bad is really, I think, novel and important. And so I would look for regulatory frameworks that are flexible enough that allow an innovator to move forward and innovate and disrupt, but not so flexible as to actually remove the guardrails so that the things aren't tested so that they're not going to hurt someone. That's the thing we want to avoid. And so we need to have that backstop of something that's ensuring that this AI tool is not going to hurt someone, while also allowing them to rapidly move into a new space and innovate.
Yeah, interesting balance. Okay.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a conversation I had with a mentor who was a professor of innovation at MIT, and he said the funny thing is that rigidity in certain places often gives us the freedom to innovate other places. And the example he brought up was like your body. If both your bones and your muscles were flexible, we could not move, right? We'd be this amorphous blob. But it's the rigidity of our bones and the flexibility of our muscles that give us that freedom to innovate. And so I would absolutely echo what Brian said. Let's concentrate the rigidity on things like standards, things like evaluation frameworks, and leave the freedom on how we do these things to the marketplace.
That's great. Don't ask my kids if they think that I'm flaccid, because they oftentimes think that, hey, could you please just stand up straight? One thing that I've been really, I have to say, I'm dying to ask this question. So it's not on the questions they gave me, so I scribbled a couple things that I'd be just first of all, no, that was wrong context. So our devices, right, we call them smart phones, right, smart devices. What I'm struck by oftentimes is that they may be smart and intelligent and give us exactly precision-driven response, right? You click on an app, it opens up, or you look at something, right? But they're not always wise. So the spirit of smart, but not wisdom. And now I think that gets back to that first question about transparency, trust, and how do we get the inputs to. Can you tease out, and again, this is something that just came to mind me, how do we tease out this real tension with smart and intelligence with artificial wisdom? Like to really say, when should we use it? When Jonathan, I don't know if you both were here at that time, where he talked about an example where there was a Pearson coefficient correlation that, it was 0.88, and he had to come back with a validation tool that said, no, that's incorrect, right? So it's, how do we know it may give you the information, but when do we, human beings, have our wisdom, or how do we get that wisdom into the tool to be able to actually come out with something that's meaningful? I again, threw it out. Feel free to say that is the dumbest question that you have ever asked, because Brian knows me well enough to know that I have many more dumb questions that I've asked in the past. But think about that.
Question, Secretary Shah. It's actually so.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson.
This is something we've been spending more and more time on in CHAI. I think everyone got the impression, certainly from Jonathan's presentation, that in the generative AI space, these models are just going to be increasingly more capable, right? Within the next 2 years, the transformers are going to have more parameter sets than the number of neuronal connections we have in our brain, right? The level of different kinds of use cases, different uses of these models is going to just be enormous. And when we think about that in the context of health and human flourishing, and what does that mean for every individual in this room, right? Every one of us would have a different definition about what health and human flourishing means to you. Your spiritual background, your ethics, your morality, how you think about your advanced directive. And so when we think about how our wisdom is imparted in these incredibly influential and increasingly more influential tools, I'm left groping, trying to how do we evaluate that? Right now, if you were to look on any of the major frontier models report cards that they self-publish, which is a great thing, and you look in the health section, it's usually, again, no offense if anyone is here from OpenAI, the most recent 4.0 report card had a section on health, and it was, here's the USMLE test score. Is that wisdom? No, I don't think so. Is that germane to all of the things that I might possibly ask that model about my health? Getting guidance, advice, recommendations? No. I mean, is it answering USMLE questions well? Yeah, it is. 0.93%, better than 0.89 or whatever the 3.5 turbo score was. And so one of the things we're thinking about in CHAI is how do we create a framework for evaluating these models, to use your word, I think wisdom, how we think about their alignment to our values and our virtues and our principles. Because I think that gets closer to the kind of impact that we hope these tools have, that they help us to lead a more flourishing life, but you need wisdom to be able to do that. And that's a really hard thing to measure, right? I can measure a USMLE test score really easy, but measuring wisdom and imparting wisdom in these tools is really hard. So, I mean, I haven't shared this publicly, I guess I'll share it here. There's no press.
Late breaking.
There's no press in the room, is there?
Hot off the presses.
One of the things we're going to be launching in CHAI is pulling together a roundtable of leaders from community, from religion, from patient community advocates with lived disease experience, and also the technology experts from Silicon Valley, to begin thinking about how we develop a more holistic red teaming approach. If you're familiar with that term, a red teaming framework for health AI, because at the end of the day, as I like to say, all AI is programs that are trained on our histories. That's not wisdom. That's reinforcing the systemic injustices for many people that we've had in the past. We don't want that, and so how do we train and align these models with more wisdom and more alignment to our values? So we'll see where it goes, but that's where we're going to be starting.
Fair enough. That's a great answer. Very wise. Jorge.
Well, how do we define wisdom? Like I always tell my kids that experience is learning from your own mistakes, but wisdom is learning from the mistakes of others. So I think Jonathan gave us a preview of how we're going to start building that out right there. There's a attention mechanism, how we contextualize models. That's what human beings do incredibly well. We contextualize. We have these agent-based approaches. We talked about scaling laws. There was a couple of reports out about scaling laws and how we're going to bump into that, not because of technical limitations, but because of money. The current incarnations of these large language models cost billions of dollars of computation to run. So that makes them the exclusive province of these large tech companies. Well, keep scaling that up. It's going to take the GDP of a pretty reasonably sized country to train the next generation model. So there is an upper limit. Again, not from a technical perspective, but just based on money. Are we as a society willing to allocate those resources to continue when these models are going to cost trillions and trillions of dollars? But I think that contextualization, the agent-based approach is how we're going to see that wisdom emerge.
Thank you for that. So consensus and contextualization. Did I say that right? Context. Thank you. I'm going to combine this into one question. So I have two questions left. We only have a few minutes, so this has gone by very fast. This is really about specific examples that shows that AI is working well and what makes both of you excited about, hopeful for, with these examples, or one or two from both experiences. This shows that, gosh, this is so much we can do with this that's positive or transformational or gives you hope for the future. So, Jorge, well, let me start with you and then Brian.
What makes me incredibly optimistic is all the drudgery and manual processes that exist in public health.
I've never heard that.
We cobble together systems through people, through these manual processes. And so what gets me excited is that we can use generative AI to do that, right? Everywhere I go, I don't think Washington, because you guys are pretty
never
awesome.
Washington.
Every other local public health department, the most prominent thing is the fax machine, because we're still processing information, we're still sharing information via fax. So one of the things that we've been working on is like a very intelligent optical character recognition that leverages some of these large language models, that's able to translate an analog signal into a digital signal, so that we can eliminate the need for humans to read the fax, input it
manually
into another system manually. That is soul-crushing work, and that's what I think we can do. We can leverage the AI, ML, to take out that drudgery. So that's what gets me really excited.
And do you think that, sorry, Brian, I know you're going to answer as well, but do you think that then creates another set of level of drudgery for now that we've solved the fax issue, now it's the next issue, and now that's drudgery, and can we continue to build on that?
I don't think maybe it will. Usually when you automate one task in a process, it shifts the value, the economic value, to other ends of a process. What I'm hoping is happening is that if we free up that manual data entry task, those data janitorial services that we're asking oftentimes our EPIs to do, is that it'll free them up to actually do the public health interventions, to ask those public health questions that they want to do. Why they went to grad school. I don't think they went to grad school to
manually enter
data.
That's right. That's right. And that's where we have the workforce challenges, the turnover of our workforce, et cetera. So thank you for that. Brian.
I'm going to come back to that concept of human flourishing that I had shared earlier. I think, the thing that really excites me, 2 to 3 years from now, we're going to have highly capable generative AI models, similar to the very large frontier models that are out there, but models that are highly tuned to us, to me, to you. Models that are trained on how we talk, how we write emails, how we interact with people, what our priorities are, what our values are. And these sort of personal assistants will help us navigate all the complex things that are out there, like healthcare beneficiary enrollment, or finding the right kind of doctor that I need to see because my wrist really hurts. And that kind of personal assistant that helps you access care and get the right kind of care at the right time is going to be hugely transformational for our society, for a lot of the people that candidly aren't in this room, that don't have easy access to health and health care and that kind of knowledge. I think the thing that keeps me up about that, that concerns me, is if you're increasing the demand on health care delivery by new people that are able to access it, what's going to happen to the supply? What's happening to the nurses and the providers? We need to find a pretty innovative way to scale up the way that they're going to be engaging with all those people. Now, the thing on that side that gives me hope are some of the early wins that we're seeing in ambient listening and these AI scribes. DAX, I think, was the one from Microsoft. Bridge is another competitor out there. Suki. These tools, so I talk with a lot of health systems, and regularly I hear stories of doctors coming up to C-suite executives in tears, giving them hugs, saying, this has changed my life. I think Jonathan gave the story of a kid asking their mom or dad, why are you home at dinner tonight? Right. It's because the AI tool allowed him to. I think those sorts of things are going to start in a meaningful way moving the needle on the burnout concern that we have. At least that's my hope.
That's great. I have so many directions that I want to go with that, those two sets of answers. But let me do this. In the interest of time, I have one more question I'm going to ask both of you to give a quick answer to. But we do have a few minutes, so if there are a couple of maybe audience questions, please, do we have an extra mic, or is this the... Okay, so we're going to do a little Phil Donahue. I don't know if people remember Phil Donahue. Did anybody remember Phil Donahue? Oh, I'm the only one who remembers Phil Donahue. Yeah, thank you. I was going to say Vanna White, but that didn't quite seem to... Yeah, I'm not Vanna White, and certainly I don't know where the letters are. As we tee up the two questions, here's the question to both of you is, if you were speaking to young health leaders, the future, the next gen, students, our kids, right, which in many ways you are. There are some folks who do not know who Phil Donahue is. What is a tangible recommendation you'd have for them to prepare for a future with AI as a tool that they must be ready to use? Maybe not to replace them, but to augment the work that they do. So, Jorge.
I think you said a very critical word, which is augmentation. And this, if you're thinking, if your mental model is that I have to race against machines, to borrow a phrase from Bjorn Johnson and McAfee's work, if your mental model is it's humans doing the work or machines doing the work, well, guess what? That race has already been lost to machines. The new paradigm that you should adopt is humans with machines. Every time there's been a major technological revolution, it's been the humans who adopt technology, who integrate it into their workflows, that have been the winners in any industry. So the advice I would give is embrace the technology, think about how you can integrate it into your workflow, and think about the new questions that you can answer now that you couldn't in the past.
Woo! I'm sorry, I just got really excited when you said that. Wow, it's tremendous. So, Brian, can you top that? Can you match that enthusiasm?
I can echo what Jorge said. I guess I would just add to it. I think to get to that, we all need to urgently educate ourselves on what responsible AI looks like in our field in public health. What does it mean for a model developer to build a model for a specific use case in a responsible way for a public health official? What does it mean for you to deploy that, as Jorge is describing, in a way that it's not a human out of the loop, it's a human in the loop that's being augmented, right? And importantly, how do you think critically about these AI tools so that you can critically evaluate, is this tool the right tool for the use case I have? Or is it the wrong tool? Is it right for that kind of population that I'm serving? Or is it not even trained on anybody from that population? Like, these are the critical questions that you need to educate yourselves and all of us on in future generations, because that's how we're going to get to the ideal that Jorge is describing.
I love it. Thank you. Context matters. Absolutely. Okay, any hands up? I know we lost a mic up here, so we've got one mic there. We're going to share a mic. And please introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Sachin Lande from Department of Health. You both talked about the responsible AI framework, and one of the pillars is about the fairness and bias. And you also talked about the overall testability of the data and assurance labs. I want to ask this question from what kind of data testability you can use in assurance labs, and how can you take it for building these models further? So specifically around what kind of data you can use for testing.
Let me go ahead and maybe I'll answer that one first. So the assurance lab, so in CHI, we have 32 labs that are going through the certification process. The vast majority of them are from health systems. So their data is principally from health systems, de-identified, privacy-preserving data that's clinical data, imaging data, pathology data, genomic data. It's data from the healthcare delivery sector. There's a few payers in that space as well, and so those types of data obviously can be used to evaluate models that, as an input, use that kind of data, and also train models in that space as well. There are other use cases where obviously that kind of data wouldn't be so good for validating, but that's principally where it's coming from, mostly from healthcare delivery systems.
Okay, anything? And
I would just quickly add that you can always look at the distribution of the population and look at the distribution of your data and think about, is it matching? And there's a difference between being representative and being fair. Just because you have the same proportion of minority representation does not mean that the model is fair. Sometimes you have to synthetically oversample those populations.
second question, last question, final question. Who's got it? Where's the mic? Okay, same vicinity.
Sorry.
Great.
Move away from the feedback. So I'm an epidemiologist, and in health research, in epidemiologic research, we think about validation a lot, and there are two different paradigms for it. When you have a quantitative measure, you can go do a validity study or a reliability study and say, I meet the gold standard 99% of the time, or sensitivity, specificity, stuff like that. When you're doing generative qualitative work, which is more values-based, the validity process is self-reflective. Is what am I thinking? Who am I? Where am I coming from? What are the things what do I bring to this while I try to interpret it? And as you talk about what fairness is, what bias is, do I trust this? Would I trust you with my data? It concerns me to hear quantitative things for what is really a qualitative question. Do I trust that you have my best interests in mind to use my data? Is really a qualitative question. There's not a yes or no answer. You need to know what my best interests are. I don't know what my best interests are. That's what my therapist is for. So there's this sort of as you talk about these test cases, it's very easy to go to the quantitative ones, but the qualitative ones are more important. And I would encourage you, and I'm curious how Brian, you're nodding at me like, yeah, I've totally thought about this. So I'd love to hear, what are your thoughts on this these two kinds of trust, the trust in process versus the trust in outcome? And how should we all be thinking about this as we grapple with AI?
I really appreciate you bringing that up. It is something that some of us have thought more deeply about in CHI than others. And certainly I'm not the deepest thinker in this space, but there is a variety of different capabilities, as an example, in these assurance labs. Some of them have focused just on the quant space. We're just going to do the math. We're going to give you your AUC score, your F1 score, and that's what we're great at. There are others that are, we want to come up with a more subjective usability evaluation. How do they mitigate human cognitive biases? How intuitive is it? Right? These are essentially subjective heuristics. To your point about data, how is the data, how are the patients informed about the use of the data in the training set? Was consent obtained? That's maybe more of a quantitative yes/no, but you get my point that there's a subjective set of evaluatory criteria that some of these labs are really thinking very deeply about, that I'm really excited to see become part of that framework that some assurance labs will offer, some won't. I mean, it will be a marketplace, and so if groups value that kind of subjective evaluation, like I hope they do, because I think it's critically important, we'll see more successful labs that incorporate that kind of evaluation. Because you're right, there's a certain level of trust that you get from seeing, yeah, it performs accurately, and here's your AUC score above 0.9. There's a whole nother kind of trust that you get, like, are their values aligned with mine in building that model and how they transparently share things about that model? I want to trust them to be my personal assistant, right, 2 years from now. Because I wouldn't if I think that they're going to use my data for some nefarious way. So I agree with you.
Yeah, it just, I have to tell you this funny anecdote, which is that when Brian took this position, I said, this is from my South Asian perspective. I said, wow, you're joining an organization that you're heading that's called Chai? Tea? Seriously? Are you serious? You need to market that with some teacups and all sorts. And anyway, Brian didn't fall for it, luckily. Yeah, I need to talk to AI to be able to get him convinced. We're at time. I just want to thank both Brian and Jorge for their both perspectives and also joining us all the way from wherever they came from, Atlanta, Boston, et cetera. Just thank you so much, and please join me in saying what a great panel.